From mysterious unidentifiable meat raining from the sky, to the mysterious disappearance and deaths of the Frog Boys, and a father finding his daughter stabbed 20 times in his kitchen, part 17 of the ultimate unsolved mystery Iceberg will have it all. The original Iceberg, created by Jimbo Seth, will be linked in the description below. This video marks the end of Layer 3 and the beginning of Layer 4. If you are new to the series, make sure to check out the previous parts, which will be linked below, or watch the supercut version of parts 1 through 15, which is over 10 hours long. All of it will be in the description. If you enjoy, make sure to subscribe and hit the like button to help me out. To begin the video, we're going to take a look at one of the very first mysteries I ever came across on YouTube, the Frog Boys. This entry is about a group of 5 grade school boys whose names were Choi Won-woo, Hoyeon Jo, Young-yu Kim, Chanin Park, and Jonsig Kim. They were 13, 12, 11, 10, and 9 years old respectively. The South Korean missing persons incident gradually evolves into an infamous ongoing murder case. On March 26, 1991, the kids left home around 8 a.m. in order to hang out with each other for the day. Being that this was the first regional election in South Korean history, March 26 was a brief holiday. The day was like any other, and the kids were hanging out at one of their homes and just fooling around, making a lot of noise. But eventually, their ruckus got to someone in the home and the kids were kicked out and told to play elsewhere. At this point, there were 6 kids in total. One of the 6 kids, named Tae-ryung Kim, couldn't tag along since his mother was calling him back home to eat. He said his farewells and headed back, while the other 5 strolled around town gathering items to play with like tin cans and sticks. One of the boys got the idea to visit Mount Waryung to find salamander eggs, and I think this will be a good time to explain that the group of kids got the name Frog Boys because most of the residents in the area weren't familiar with salamanders, so the new staff decided to switch that with frogs. Not long after, Tae-ryung ran back to the group after finishing breakfast. He was able to catch up to them at the base of the mountain before they left onto the hiking trail. When Tae-ryung learned of the group's plans, he lit up a bit, but quickly grew discouraged as his mother had warned him not to play too far away. He decided to listen to his mom and stay behind while the group went off, and this decision ultimately spared him his life. The boys set out for the mountain and stayed there for the entire morning and eventually missed lunch. Their parents were a bit annoyed by this, but didn't pay it too much mind, expecting the kids to come back any moment. But as the hours continued to pass and there was no sign of the boys, everyone began to worry. They immediately decided that it's best to allocate the bulk of their time and people to searching Mount Waryung. So the parents divided up some routes amongst each other and headed out in hopes that they'd find the kids just fooling around somewhere, but no luck. It was nearly 8 p.m. when they accepted that they themselves couldn't do much else, so they had to call the police. The police also suspected that the kids were lost in the mountains somewhere, but after searching until 3 a.m., they too couldn't find any trace of the boys. News outlets were all over this case, and before you knew it, all of South Korea was aware of the Frog Boys. One of the many theories, and probably the most obvious one, was that the kids were kidnapped. The boys were known to be pretty playful and sociable, so it wasn't unreasonable to suggest that the boys may have been lured away. There were also rumors that the boys were forced into a business where kidnapped children begged on the streets for money. And some more far-fetched theories included the involvement of spies from North Korea who used the children for government testing and, of course, UFO abductions. As time went along with no updates, the rumors just got weirder and weirder. There was even one that proposed the idea that a victim of leprosy kidnapped and consumed the boys' livers because of some legend suggesting that raw liver would cure his disease. Like with most missing persons cases, this one also faded into obscurity over the years. At one point, there was a phone call made by what was assumed to be a child claiming that the boys were alive and that the caller was with them. The residents in the area area lit up with joy after this news, but this happiness was only temporary as the call turned out to be a prank. The fathers of the boys dedicated every hour of their days to finding their kids. All of them quit their jobs and scoured the entire country, searching through all kinds of weather and terrain in hopes of finding them. There weren't many people in positions of authority that were willing to help the parents, so they had to resort to handing out paper booklets with information in hopes that some random person would have valuable insight. But as you could expect, these normal people didn't have the means to search for the kids non-stop. So after 3 years of searching, they had to return to their careers in order to support the rest of their families. And as if it couldn't get any worse for these guys, someone proposed the idea that one of the fathers themselves was responsible. Police did investigate this, but they were all deemed innocent. Authorities even went as far as to dig up one of their homes, believing that the bodies were buried underneath it. After over a decade since the boys went missing, an unassuming hiker who was foraging for acorns and fruits discovered all 5 bodies of the boys. And the shocking thing was, this location was actually searched extensively by law enforcement years ago. Additionally, this location was formerly the site of an army shooting range, which was relocated in the mid-1990s. According to locals, there were a bunch of little items that the boys would have taken an interest in, such as leftover bullets and casings. This sparked a new rumor that the boys were accidentally killed by stray bullets fired off by the military personnel. After days of additional investigation, post-discovery of the bodies, investigators said that the boys died of hypothermia. This caught a lot of people off guard and it triggered some pretty immense outrage in the public. Many residents claimed that the police had destroyed the site where the boys were found and only said that the cause of death was hypothermia as a cop-out. More or less, the public was saying that the cops were being lazy or trying to cover something up. Locals also added that it was impossible for the boys to have died of hypothermia since it would have been tough to get lost in the mountain. It resembled a large hill more than an actual large mountain. But let's just give them the benefit of the doubt and say that the boys did get lost in the wilderness. Well, the mountain was close enough to town that the intense lights that brighten up the buildings at night would have still been visible from far away. So it was very tough to believe that the boys couldn't find their way back home. Investigators were confident in their hypothermia verdict and attempted to convince the public that this was indeed what happened. They pointed to how the children's clothes were tied in a knot and covered their bodies. Authorities claimed that this was evidence that the children were trying to keep warm, but the locals and residents of South Korea were still not convinced. Eventually, the results from forensic scientists were made public. According to the results, hypothermia was not the cause of death, nor was it a gun. The scientists determined that the boys had died from a blunt object and/or sharp weapon. There were several well-defined cuts on the skulls of the boys that were still in a decent enough shape for research. So now it's confirmed that foul play was involved. But who exactly did something so heinous? Was it someone that lived within the community, or was it some random nomad? Remember, there were 5 children in total, so many people believe this type of murder case can only have been carried out by a disturbed and experienced lunatic. So investigators began digging further back in history, trying to find similar cases. Most of the public thought that no first-time killer would be daring enough to take 5 lives at once. While the killer was never found, the families could at least rest just a slightly bit easier knowing that their children were found. The attorneys of the families filed a lawsuit against the police force for basically destroying the evidence found on the mountain, but despite going through 3 entire trials, the judge decided that the police did nothing wrong. There was a statute of limitations that came into play around the mid-2000s, but then in 2015, it was removed. So now any new catalyst could reignite the investigation. The Iron Pillar of Delhi has captivated many with its inability to rust over the last 1600 years. Initially, the pillar looks just like any other across India. It stands at approximately 24 feet tall with a weight estimated to be well over 6 tons. On the surface of the pillar, you can see inscriptions in Brahmi which reference King Chandragupta II of the Gupta Empire, which is a common detail on many of the pillars. However, this particular one has no rust. Some people suspect that phosphorus was used during its production, which assisted in its preservation over the centuries. However, historians like to point out that phosphorus was discovered in the late 1660s, while the pillar was created over 1,000 years before that. The pillar has since been categorized as an OOP art, or an out-of-place artifact. This term is used to classify historical objects from around the world that display technological advancement beyond the time when they were constructed. Chemists determined that the pillar was likely created by heating large pieces of iron, then combining them into one. But something that contradicts this theory is this particular method that was used was said to have only been discovered 200 years ago. Another aspect of the pillar that baffles historians is the lack of visible joints. The construction is basically perfect and is very tough, if not impossible, to replicate with modern techniques. It was August 30th, 1974 when the Cowden family went out for a camping trip near Carberry Creek, Copper, Oregon. The family consisted of Richard, the father, his wife Belinda, 5-year-old son David, 5-month-old daughter Melissa, and their dog named Droopy. The trip was only meant to last a few days at most, spanning across Labor Day weekend, but the family never returned home. About 7 months after their disappearance in April of 1975, the lifeless bodies of the family were found. They were resting about 7 miles from their campsite and were left in a questionable state. Richard and his family were residents of Oregon living in White City. The family frequently went out on trips, many of which revolved around camping outside. However, this particular trip on Labor Day weekend was spontaneous and not planned. Richard had prepared to work on his driveway over the holiday and move a load of gravel using his truck. But unfortunately for him, his truck broke down, so he made the impromptu decision for the family to go camping. It's pretty crazy to think that this simple mishap would result in the family's deaths. Who knows, if the truck never broke down, the family may still be alive today. The family decided to visit the Siskiyou Mountains, located in the northwestern region of California or southwestern area of Oregon. After their arrival, Richard brought his 5-year-old son to the Copper General Store on Sunday, September 1st. They were traveling by foot and reached the store at 9 a.m. where they proceeded to buy milk before returning to their campsite. This was the last confirmed sighting of Richard alive. Another detail that should be noted is Belinda's mom actually lived near the campsite. In fact, she was less than a mile away, and the family actually intended on visiting her for dinner, but the family never showed up. This prompted Belinda's mother to head out to the camping grounds to see if the family was okay. When she arrived, she was shocked to see that the family was nowhere in sight, despite the family's vehicles still being there and the keys resting on a picnic table. Along with the keys, the following items were also found strewn about. There was Belinda's purse, a diaper bag, camp stove, half-finished carton of milk, Richard's expensive watch and wallet, and a pack of cigarettes that matched the brand Belinda was known to smoke. Belinda's mother waited at the campsite for about an hour and roamed around hoping to find Richard and the family, but there was no trace of anyone. She proceeded to call 911 and the officers scoured the vicinity for hours but couldn't find a single clue as to where the family had gone. Lieutenant Mark Kazar later stated that they missed out on a crucial opportunity at finding the Cowden family since the search was delayed by a day due to the lack of any signs of violence. The very next morning, on September 2nd, the family's basset hound Droopy was seen in front of the Copper General Store that Richard took David to. The dog was scratching at the front door and barking, so investigators thought that one of the family members was nearby, but yet again, there was no one around. As the investigation went along, scouts, the U.S. Forest Service, the Oregon National Guard, and hundreds of volunteers assisted the police in finding the family. While the Forest Service scavenged over 25 miles of trails, helicopters were deployed over the campsite with infrared equipment. With only the family dog to show for, the search was officially called off on September 7th. Without much evidence, it was tough for investigators to form a plausible explanation as to why the family disappeared. Richard had a very successful career and made more than enough for his family, and the family had very little debt. So, with both of those points in mind, police ruled out the possibility of a voluntary disappearance. The next theory involved foul play, but it didn't seem like a robbery since, as we mentioned earlier, Richard's watch and wallet were still at the campsite. The nearby creek was searched extensively and there were no signs of any bodies. Fast forward to April 12th, 1975, a pair of gold prospectors were exploring the wilderness neighboring Carberry Creek, and that's when they stumbled upon the gruesome sight of a decomposing body tied to a tree. This tree was about 7 miles from the campsite where the cowdens were set up at. Then, not too far from the tree inside a cave, the bodies of an adult female, a child, and an infant were also discovered. And the thing about this cave was that it was actually hidden away. Someone had placed large rocks in front of the entrance so that most people would never even see the bodies. Medical officials were able to identify the adult female as Belinda, the child as David, the infant as Melissa, and the man tied around the tree as Richard through some dental records. Additionally, it was determined that Belinda and David died from a .22 caliber firearm and Melissa died from severe head trauma. As for Richard, medical officials were not able to figure out how he died. Some of the authorities believed that Richard was actually the one responsible, but this was promptly ruled out. They thought that after Richard and David had returned to the campsite, the family agreed to go swimming in the creek. It was around here where the family was held at gunpoint and moved to the location where they were found. Once this news made its rounds, a family from LA who actually visited the same camping grounds on September 1st reported seeing 3 suspicious people. 2 of them were men and the third was a woman. This person said, "They acted like they were waiting for us to leave and frankly, they made us nervous so we moved on." Detective Kazar believed that the person responsible was a local due to the tucked away location where the bodies were left. Then a volunteer who was assisting in the search effort reported that they had gone through that exact same cave in September and did not see anything there. To confirm this claim, police had the man lead them to the cave just to make sure it was genuinely the same one, and indeed it was. In 2020, former Oregon State Police Detective Richard Davis revealed some info as to what it was like working on this case. He said that there were many strange and bizarre tips at the start before the family was found, claiming that they were in Seattle and San Francisco. One of the more notable suspects was a man named Dwayne Lee Little. While there were accusations that he was involved in the Cowden family murders, he was never charged. On November 2nd, 1964, he raped and murdered a 15-year-old girl. He was put on parole in May of 1974. Authorities were able to confirm that Dwayne was in Copper, Oregon on Labor Day weekend. Dwayne's girlfriend added that she saw him with a .22 caliber gun on the Christmas of the same year when the family went missing. And because of his possession of this firearm, his parole was ended. He was yet again paroled in 1977, and in 1980, he raped and beat a pregnant 23-year-old, but the victim did survive. Dwayne never cooperated with authorities when it came to openly speaking about his murders. Investigators believe that those 3 people that were seen at the campsite by that one family were Dwayne and his parents, but the parents denied being involved. Then, an inmate who was close with Dwayne claimed that he confessed to killing the Cowdens. Furthermore, Dwayne's father committed suicide just months after the bodies were found. And even though that may seem very suspicious, Dwayne's father was cleared of any involvement. So while Dwayne was never formally charged, most people believe that Dwayne is the most likely suspect. This entry refers to the missing persons case of Dora Ruth Smith, and although there is very little information out there regarding her disappearance, it is still quite an interesting case. Dora was a 47-year-old woman who went missing on April 24, 1977 in Florence, Alabama, and police believed that her life was in danger at the time of her disappearance. Apparently, Dora left her home in the middle of the night, leaving all of her belongings behind. She didn't bring her dentures, purse, house key, or any spare clothing. Dora's husband stated that he saw her step inside a green Ford LTD, and the case would go quiet like many other missing persons cases with no real leads. But in 2003, the new residents of Dora's home discovered a letter that was signed under her name. The letter was stuffed inside of an envelope along with $200 in cash, and the envelope itself was hidden underneath some wallpaper in her bedroom. The letter inside said, "They are trying to take my food away and kill me. Please help me." This letter suddenly made this seemingly standard missing persons case all the more intriguing. After this discovery, authorities thought that perhaps Dora hid other clues around the home. They searched almost every inch of it and even dug up the shed in the yard, but nothing else was found. Dora's husband Wilbur passed away in 1995, which reignited the interest in Dora's case. New investigators wanted to try their hand at solving it and in turn came upon many rumors that have haunted the neighborhood for decades. One of those rumors suggested that Dora was murdered and buried under the tin roof atop of the shed. And earlier I mentioned that the shed was dug up with no results, which is true, but I'd like to add that the cadaver dogs that were used in the investigation did give indication that something was there, which is what commenced the dig in the first place. To this day, no one has any idea what happened to Dora and what the letter meant. In the Doctor Who series, there was at one time over 150 episodes that were either lost or thrown out by the BBC in the late 1960s and mid-1970s. Numerous episodes have been recovered as the years went by, but nearly 100 from the first 6 seasons of the show are still not accounted for. For the majority of those still missing episodes, they have never been seen again since their initial airing. According to some experts that follow the show religiously, there are short clips and audio snippets from those lost episodes out there on the internet. At the time, BBC frequently erased the contents of old master tapes in order to repurpose them for new shows so they could save some money. During the production period of the episodes, both the BBC Film Library and BBC Enterprises were responsible for contributing to the show. But one thing that they disagreed with was who was responsible for archiving the Doctor Who master reels. One would assume that the film library would be the ones that had to take care of this, but they were not obligated to do so. So they ended up destroying all their copies of the episodes that were not recorded on film. At the same point in time, BBC Enterprises also erased their own reels since they deemed them as too voluminous. Then later down the line, when one side asked the other about the location of the archived episodes, they realized that neither side had saved them. Over the years, the BBC was able to recover some of the episodes from private collectors who had obtained copies from the film crews. In late March of 1922, a farmer named Andreas Gruber noticed some footprints that came from the woods and led towards the home on his farmstead, which was locally known as Hinterkaifeck. The small German town was known to be quite friendly, and any crimes would be very out of place. For those reasons, Andreas paid no mind to the footprints, but this would later turn out to become a grave mistake. On the final day of March 1922, an unknown killer took the lives of 6 people on that farm. The 6 consisted of Andreas himself, his wife Katzalia, their daughter Victoria, their granddaughter Katzalia Gabriel, the maid Maria, and their baby grandson Josef. Andreas, his wife, daughter, and granddaughter were discovered inside of the family barn, while the maid and Josef were found in the bedrooms of the home. Along with those previously mentioned footsteps, there were a number of other events on the farm that in hindsight were quite suspicious. One such occurrence was that the family's previous maid had quit her job because she felt something ominous in the house after hearing repeated noise from the attic. Then in that same month, Andreas came across a newspaper on his farmstead that he didn't recall purchasing. Initially, he believed that the newspaper was mistakenly left behind by the postman. However, it later turned out that nobody in town was subscribed to this particular paper. According to other residents, they recalled that Andreas also complained about these noises that resembled footsteps in the attic. But when he went to take a look and hopefully find a source to the noise, he found nothing. The family later hired a new maid named Maria, who began her first day of work on March 31st, 1922, the exact day that the family was murdered. She was dropped off by her sister and was wished a happy first day on the job. On April 1st, several residents made their way onto the Hinterkaifeck farm and knocked on the Gruber's home. After the first knock, nobody greeted them, so they tried again and still no answer. The locals knew that the Gruber family liked to isolate themselves and keep their lives private, so they simply thought that the family was dealing with some internal issues that would soon be resolved, so they just went ahead and left. But as the days passed, there were still no signs of life coming from that home. The Daily Mail began to pile up into a small hill, and the school noticed that the young Katzalia Gabriel had not shown up. Then, when Sunday rolled around, the frequent churchgoers noticed that the Grubers were missing. This was particularly strange as they attended church every single Sunday. Word spread fast about the absence of the family, and by April 4th, a group of 3 men visited the home with the intention of finding the family. The farm had an eerie atmosphere to it and seemed devoid of life. They looked through the windows and tried each entrance into the home, but they just couldn't get in. Then one of the men walked over to the barn. He pulled open its door, and as it loudly creaked open, he noticed these 2 out-of-place looking masses on top of the hay. He stepped inside and got closer to these objects. Then he realized that these were bodies, specifically Andreas, Katzalia, Victoria, and Katzalia Gabriel. The men fled the area and contacted police, who then discovered the bodies of the grandson and maid inside of the home. Authorities initially thought that the motive for the killings was monetary. The crime scene itself was heavily tampered with. For example, the bodies were moved to different places and the kitchen was even used. Then later on, the theory revolving around money was thrown out after police found a large sum of cash tucked away in a fairly obvious location within the home. Investigators believed that the killer lived inside of the home for a few days after killing the family. The animals were being fed and there was little food in the home, suggesting that the culprit had eaten much of it. To this day, there is very little known about the Hinterkaifeck murders in terms of the culprit or culprits responsible and the motive behind the crime. One of the primary suspects was Victoria's husband, who was rumored to have died in World War I, which for obvious reasons would make for some interesting theories. After a few decades, new details revolving around the family began to surface, one of which detailed Andreas' prison sentence in 1914 for having sex with his own daughter. Victoria was sentenced to 1 month in prison for this, and Andreas was sentenced to a year. 1914 was also the same year that Victoria's husband was rumored to have died. Katzalia Gabriel was born in 1915 and Josef in 1919. So more rumors began to make their rounds that these children were a result of an incestuous relationship between the father and daughter. And this is when Victoria's late husband comes back into play. Some theorists suggest that her husband never actually died in war, and so when he returned and learned about this relationship that Victoria had with her father, he went on a rampage which resulted in these murders. Other people suggest that something to this extent may have very well played out, but not with Victoria's husband. Instead, the culprit was a secret lover that Victoria was seeing. But to this day, there is nothing to confirm this theory. In 1943, there was a 55-year-old man named Patrick Brady who lived in Lansing, Illinois. It was April 3rd, around 5 p.m. when he headed back home after completing a standard 8-hour shift at the Inland Steel Company. When Patrick got home and stepped inside, he noticed a loud noise coming from somewhere deeper inside the home. He lived with his 14-year-old foster daughter, Gloria Sullivan. Patrick called out to her, suspecting that she was the source of the jarring sounds, but no reply. It seemed as though the noise was coming from the kitchen, so Patrick walked over and called out for Gloria once again. At this point, he was a bit irritated that he wasn't getting a response, but once he stepped into the kitchen, he understood why. Nothing in the world could have prepared him for the gruesome scene he was about to lay his eyes on. His daughter Gloria was lying on the kitchen floor lifeless. Her body was riddled with stab wounds as blood pooled around her. Patrick stood there for a few seconds, frozen, mouth agape, before rushing to contact police. Authorities determined that Gloria was stabbed a total of 20 times. 14 of the wounds were in her back, 5 of them in her chest, and the final one was at the base of her throat. But along with the stab wounds, she had defensive wounds running along her arms and hands. Investigators thought that she may have been raped as well, but this was later ruled out. Furthermore, they suspected that the assailant was equipped with 2 knives, one of which had been a paring knife which was discovered jammed into the hardware floor nearby, and not far away was the second weapon, a long-bladed butcher's knife. Patrick confirmed that both knives belonged to his house. Aside from the actual murder, the home was undisturbed. There was even a jar with a couple $100s in cash that was left behind in the kitchen. Additionally, there were no signs of forced entry. The windows had no damage and the front door was unlocked when Patrick came home, and the back door was locked. To go along with the knives, police discovered a bloody palm print in the bathroom and a long strand of blonde hair in a hairbrush also located in the same room. This was strange because Gloria had brunette hair while Patrick had short gray hair. Then in another room, another bloody fingerprint was found on a wall, and then a stack of blood-soaked towels were located in a different bathroom. And before we proceed, there is some important background info that should be shared about Gloria. You see, she and her older sister were taken away from their parents and put under the supervision of the state. Their birth father, Clarence, had walked out on the family, leaving the mother, Viola, to fend for herself. Viola ultimately caved and gave up the children as it was just too much work for her alone, and just weeks after giving up those kids, Viola died. The eldest child, Theodora, was later moved to a new family located in Chicago, while Gloria was eventually placed into the care of Patrick and his wife in 1935. Patrick and his wife had tried to adopt Gloria several times before, but failed since the state could not locate her father, Clarence. In 1941, Patrick's wife tragically passed away after a long fight with cancer, and ever since then, Gloria took on more of a housekeeper role while Patrick worked to keep food on the table. Gloria was a tremendous child who excelled in school and even found time to babysit the neighborhood children. During the investigation, police learned that on the day of the murder, Patrick left at 8 a.m., but not before giving Gloria some money that she had asked for in order to go shopping. Around 9 a.m., Gloria called a friend of hers named Dorothy and asked if she would like to go with her to go shopping for new clothes nearby Hammond, Indiana. Dorothy said yes and took the next bus to meet up with Gloria at her house. And around the same time that Dorothy got on the bus, a local laundry delivery business just dropped off some clothes at Gloria's house. In case you're wondering, no, the delivery driver was not the killer. Then there was an elderly woman named Viola who lived across the street from Patrick and Gloria, who stopped by to pick up a vacuum that she had let them borrow earlier. This happened at around 9:30 a.m. and Viola reported that nothing seemed out of place and Gloria acted normal. By 10:20 a.m., Dorothy arrived at Gloria's. She knocked on the door several times and waited outside for about 5 minutes before wrapping around the side of the house to look through the window, but she couldn't see anything as the blinds had been shut. Furthermore, she said that she may have heard a radio playing inside, but she wasn't entirely sure if that's what she was hearing. After the continued lack of a response, Dorothy decided to get on another bus at 10:30 a.m. to go shopping by herself. The next person to visit the home was Patrick when he returned from work. Investigators quickly exhausted their list of suspects, but then one witness came forward and claimed that they saw 52-year-old Clarence Sullivan on a bus near the home around 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. on the day that Gloria was murdered. And remember, Clarence is Gloria's biological father. Authorities then allocated all of their resources on locating Clarence. Patrick informed police that Clarence was said to be living in Kentucky in 1935. Police also got in touch with Gloria's sister, Theodora, who was 20 years old at the time. Theodora said that it had been over 8 months since she last spoke with Gloria and that she had no idea where Clarence was. The police force was given an immense amount of resources to fund the investigation, but despite that, there was no significant progress made in the case. As for the police's major suspect, Clarence, he was never found and was later legally declared dead in 1950. The loss of Gloria was a massive hit for Patrick, and he went through the motions of his daily life the next few years without any sort of enthusiasm at all. Not only had his wife's life been cut short as a result of cancer, but now some monster had stolen Gloria's life. Patrick visited the police station several times a week consistently for 4 years, just on the off chance that they had some bit of good news. And 4 years after Gloria's murder, Patrick died of a heart attack at work. On Gloria's tombstone, Patrick requested that a particular word must go on it, that being daughter. Within Milton, Florida, there is a county known as Santa Rosa. One characteristic the area is best known for is its climate, having earned itself the title of Helltown due to its humidity and abundant pests, including mosquitoes. Another aspect of the county that is notorious is the rise in population who are severely addicted to illegal substances. On March 8, 2016, in Santa Rosa County, a 36-year-old man by the name of Chip Campbell went missing. He was last seen by a security camera at a Circle K gas station. Friends and family of Chip stated that he looked like a completely different man in the footage. His hair had gotten long and messy, and he had lost an immense amount of weight. Chip was seen hauling 2 backpacks at the time, but when the camera recorded him leaving, he was no longer holding these 2 backpacks. Chip's sister Laura stated that he was a quiet and kind man, almost like a gentle giant type of character. After leaving that gas station bathroom on March 8th, he was never seen again. Just 2 days prior, on March 6th, Chip's roommate Tanya returned home around 10:30 p.m. When she stepped inside, she found the house in a complete mess. There was mud all over the floors, the fridge doors were left wide open, and insulin vials, which were owned by Chip, were tossed all over the kitchen. Then in the bathroom, Chip's phone was found with his battery ripped out. Now, what makes this case all the more strange is the contents found within those 2 backpacks that Chip left behind. It is unknown whether he left them in the bathroom intentionally or if he just forgot them, but most investigators believe that he did purposely leave them behind, since you don't just forget your belongings like that. Inside of the 2 backpacks were food stamp cards, a social security card, a birth certificate belonging to Chip's dad, medical items for Chip's diabetes, some random clothes and food, and a first aid kit. For the most part, one would guess that these items were put together with the intention of going on a long journey, but we have no idea where Chip planned to go and for what reason. To make matters more confusing, why did he leave all of this behind? It was later revealed by friends and family of Chip's that he had recently started hanging out with sketchy people that may or may not have been addicts. One of the first suspects on police's radar was Tanya, Chip's roommate. Upon meeting, the 2 had great chemistry, and it didn't take long before they decided that they should live together. And after moving in, Chip started spending more and more time with Tanya. That's when family began to notice that Chip started to change. Not only did he start dyeing his hair, but he also wore drastically different clothing. His personality also took a turn for the worse. In December of 2015, it was rumored that Chip started receiving texts and calls from a mysterious individual that really worked him up. Chip feared for his life and said that he needed protection, so he went out and purchased a gun. Apparently, Chip owed someone a lot of money, but it should be noted that this money may have been a collective sum accrued by both Chip and Tanya. 1 month later, in January of 2016, Chip was involved in a car accident at the exact same Circle K that he later disappeared at. This accident induced a diabetic seizure within Chip, and he ultimately lost his license. His job followed since he now had no way to get around, and as you can imagine, no income caused him a lot of stress, which led to his weight loss. Back to March 6, when Tanya returned to a ransacked home, investigators realized that the home had basically been outfitted as a drug den. In the attic, there was even what seemed to be a meth lab. Further investigation into Tanya resulted in accusations that she had forged Chip's dad's signature on several checks after Chip disappeared. She was arrested but went on the run after she posted bail. Tanya was able to elude police for about a year before being arrested in California. Chip Campbell remains missing to this day, and he was last seen wearing a green camouflage long-sleeve shirt, jeans, and white sneakers. At the time of his disappearance, he was around 6 feet to 6 feet 2 inches tall and weighed about 200 pounds. The Angel of the Meadow is the title given to an unidentified murder victim who was discovered in Angel Meadow, Manchester on January 25, 2010. The body was discovered at a site that was formerly a car park and had been nicknamed Hell upon Earth due to the poor condition that it was in. At the time, the site was actually under construction, and it was planned to be developed into an office for a company called the Cooperative Group, who specialize in wholesale. A construction worker was roaming the area when he noticed a skull. This later led to the discovery of an entire skeleton which was buried underneath a blue carpet. Medical officials determined that the victim had fractured her neck, clavicle, and jaw. It's also believed that she died in the 1970s or possibly the 80s, and was born in the early to mid 1950s. She was estimated to be about 5'1" to 5'5" inches tall and was likely Middle Eastern. It took 2 years before police were able to compile a list of 18 highly probable identities for the victim. victim. This list later increased to a little over 20 possible identities. One of the stronger ones was a woman named Tanzania. In March of 2015, her body was buried in an unmarked grave, and the 2 police officers who worked on the case were the only people to attend her ceremony. Then in 2018, investigators revealed that the victim may have been killed by a man named Christopher Hallwell. The Kentucky meat shower refers to an event that occurred on March 3, 1876, between 11 a.m. and 12 p.m., where pieces of red meat fell from the sky near Olympia Springs in Bath County, Kentucky. The wife of a farmer, referred to as Mrs. Couch, was on her porch making soap when she heard a loud thud. She turned her head towards the direction where the sound came from, and she saw a large chunk of meat. Mrs. Couch looked around but had no idea where it came from. Then, not long after, another piece fell right in front of her. This meat was coming from the sky. The majority of the pieces were not all that big, about 2 inches by 2 inches. Some samples of the meat was taken to be tested, and the Newark Scientific Association shared that the meat was lung tissue from either a horse or human infant. There were other pieces of meat determined to be muscle and cartilage as well. There are several theories regarding how the meat fell, ranging from a plane accidentally dropping cargo to vultures dropping their food. But it seems that people cannot come to an agreement on what type of meat it actually was. Some said it was a cow, horse, bear, deer, or lamb, while others suggested it was human. On September 16, 2007, a farmer was tending to his field, which was part of a plot of land about 5 miles away from Watertown, New York. Specifically, the farmer was cutting hay, and as his field gradually cleared up, this object began to appear in front of him. It almost looked like a body. It didn't take long for the farmer to realize that what he was seeing was actually a skeleton still dressed in the clothing that he had on before his death. Law enforcement was promptly on the scene, and they pretty quickly found out the identity of the individual. The skeleton belonged to a man who went missing 6 months ago. He was a 24-year-old Army sergeant stationed at Fort Drum named Patrick Rust. Patrick was born on June 3, 1982 in Ogdensburg, New York. After graduating high school in 2001, Patrick planned to go on vocational school in order to pursue a career as a welder. However, the 9/11 event sparked something within Patrick that made him pursue a path in the military instead. So in May of 2002, he joined the Army, and after completing his training, he was assigned to the 10th Mountain Division, which was stationed at Fort Drum. And this location just so happened to be very close to the part of New York that Patrick grew up in. Fast forward to April of 2004, Patrick was deployed for the very first time to Iraq, where he stayed until November of the same year. About a year later, he would yet again be deployed, this time to Afghanistan, and this deployment lasted about another year. Patrick was finally able to return to New York in January of 2007, where he decided that he needed a break, so he took a 30-day leave. Now, Patrick wasn't facing PTSD or anything, he just wanted some time to enjoy his life a bit and explore. If anything, he enjoyed the experiences overseas. After 30 days, Patrick returned to Fort Drum, and he had befriended a fellow soldier there named Robert Van Velsen. The two eventually came up with the idea of moving to a different area of New York as roommates, since that would help lessen the amount each had to pay in rent. They decided on a particular location and moved in on March 14th. Everything seemed to be going as planned, and just as a reminder, this is currently in the year 2007, and if you recall, Patrick's body was discovered in September of this year. He also went missing 6 months before his body was found, so this is the part of the story where Sergeant Rust disappears. On March 15th, 2007, both Patrick and Robert got off work and decided to head back home. Patrick didn't have a driver's license, so he relied on Robert to get around. Robert recalled hearing Patrick taking a call on the phone at 5:30 p.m. from a friend who was visiting from Colorado. Patrick told Robert that they were just setting up a date so that they could hang out together. The duo arrived home and stayed there for a short amount of time before Robert decided that he wanted to go to the Salmon Run Mall. Patrick made the choice to go with Robert. The mall was less than 3 miles from their apartment, and while the two were there, Patrick purchased a PSP and a CD from the Best Buy store. The two also had dinner at a Wendy's located in the food court of the mall, and it's here where things begin to get a little interesting. Between 6:32 and 6:39 p.m., Patrick made and answered numerous calls. The people that he spoke to included another soldier named Dylan Rustmeyer, his father, and his father's girlfriend. Patrick spoke to his father about their plans for March 16th, which was his dad's birthday. While still in the mall, Patrick withdrew some cash at an ATM. This marked the 4th time he had withdrawn money that week alone, and each withdrawal was $200 each, which was the maximum per machine. Patrick and Robert eventually decided to leave the mall just before 8 p.m. Then all of a sudden, Robert said he wanted to get a tan, but Patrick was in a bit of a rush to get home, so he made the decision to walk the rest of the way back while Robert went off to a location called Totally Tan Sun Center. The journey back was about half a mile and it was starting to get pretty cold. That soldier that called Patrick, Dylan Rustmeyer, said he saw Patrick walking home. This meeting wasn't planned by any means and was just pure luck that they encountered each other. Dylan noted that Patrick didn't wear a coat despite the cold weather, so he offered to drive Patrick the rest of the way. They reached the apartment complex at 8:10 p.m. and according to Dylan, he didn't actually wait to see Patrick go inside the building. It took another 20 minutes before Patrick's roommate Robert returned from getting his tan, and according to Robert, Patrick wasn't in the apartment when he got back. Robert went to bed about an hour and a half later at 10 p.m. and took a note that Patrick was still not back, which was very strange. I'd like to add that investigators would later report that it may have been possible that another soldier accompanied Dylan when he dropped off Patrick. If true, this soldier's name was Scott. Located near the tanning spot that Robert was at was a bar called Clueless, which was well known in the area for being accepting towards people of all sexualities. Employees of the bar said that they saw Patrick there between 9 and 9:30 p.m. The manager, Billy Ritz, stated that Patrick looked really anxious. This sparked debate on Patrick's sexuality. At the time, he was actually seeing 2 women, and all of his friends and family said that there were no signs that Patrick was gay. So it is unknown whether Patrick visited the bar to meet up with someone or for another reason entirely. Patrick was later seen talking with a man who was named Patrick Law, and for the sake of the entry, I'm going to be referring to the other man by his last name so we don't get confused. So Law was actually Patrick's childhood friend, and the two hadn't talked to each other in a very long time. Law was at the bar with his boyfriend, who was also a soldier at Fort Drum named Travis Walter. Law and Patrick spent a considerable amount of time catching up with each other's lives, which seemed to annoy Law's boyfriend. The bar's manager told authorities that the couple had a bit of an argument regarding the attention that Law was giving to Patrick. Before leaving, Law and Patrick exchanged phone numbers so that they could hang out again. Patrick hung around the bar a little while longer, but was denied further drinks. He eventually stepped out through an emergency exit as he looked like he was going to puke. Patrick never returned after passing through that exit, which was about 1 a.m. At 1:03 a.m., Patrick had a 21-second conversation with Law on the phone. Then they had another call lasting 11 seconds. Then, less than 30 seconds after hanging up on that call, there was another one lasting over 3 minutes. This was the last call between the two for about half an hour. A later call at 1:36 a.m. revealed that Law confessed his feelings for Patrick, and over the next couple of days, there would be several additional calls made to Patrick's phone. However, they all went to voicemail. When March 16th, Friday, came around, Patrick's father, Rodney, was ready to join his son for that guy's weekend out that they were planning for his birthday. But Patrick never called Rodney as was planned, so Rodney just thought that there was some sort of emergency at work. But Patrick never showed up to Fort Drum that day. Before Patrick was officially declared missing, his personal effects at Fort Drum were taken by a supervisor and stored after he was reported as AWOL. This issue became a hotly debated area within the police force, as the army essentially took all of Patrick's possessions that may have served as useful evidence. A couple days passed with no sign of Patrick, so on March 18th, Patrick's superiors contacted the police to inform them that Patrick had not shown up for work. Authorities and Patrick's squadmates paid a visit to the apartment with no sign of Patrick, but the search for Patrick didn't officially start with earnest until both of his parents went to the police department to file missing persons reports, and by the time they did that, it was already March 20th. Several different people were questioned about Patrick's whereabouts, but the one statement that lingered in everyone's mind was made by Robert Van Velsen, Patrick's roommate. When asked where he thought Patrick may have gone, he said, "If I had $27,000 in the bank, I'd be in Canada if I wasn't already dead." This comment alarmed everyone, as this was the first time the idea that Patrick may not be alive was proposed. The investigation continued, but as the months passed, the police really didn't make much more progress. There was one Fort Drum soldier who told police that he saw someone who looked very similar to Patrick Rust and that it may have been him. The witness said, "I rolled my window down and called out his name. The person that I thought looked like Sergeant Rust then fled down Coffeen Street." The witness said that the person who appeared to look like Patrick stared at him for about 15 seconds before running off. On March 30th, someone attempted to log into one of Patrick's financial accounts to no avail. Then there was a second successful attempt on April 26th, where the person who logged in changed the address registered to the account. A consultant who worked for the company of the account stated that it would have been incredibly difficult to gain access to the account if it wasn't Patrick himself or someone close to him, and that was pretty much it for the investigation until Patrick's skeleton was discovered. Medical officials examined Patrick's remains, but because they had deteriorated so much, it was impossible to do toxicology tests. But they did state that the likelihood Patrick suffered a wrongful death was very high, although they don't know what caused it. It's also estimated that Patrick died anywhere between 4 and 6 months before being discovered. One of the primary theories was that Patrick had died accidentally. While intoxicated, Patrick may have wandered the city before ending up in the field that he was found in. From here, he likely may have succumbed to the elements as he did not bring a jacket and it was noticeably chilly outside at the time. However, there are some holes with this theory, one being that the field was exceptionally far from the bar if Patrick traveled on foot, and factoring in the weather, many thought that it was unlikely that Patrick actually walked all the way there. But then again, he was drunk, so it's possible that he had no idea what he was doing, which allowed him to make such a journey. By fall of 2008, investigators essentially exhausted their entire list of leads. One detective said, "We don't know that a crime occurred, so to say that there were suspects would be difficult. There's a lot of people we're talking to. We have a big push on trying to generate some more leads." Now, you remember that soldier named Dylan Rustmeyer? Well, one of the calls that he had with Patrick was a key piece of information that authorities believe can help the case. It was a short call where Dylan said, "Rust, I can't help you out, man, but call my boy and he will hook you up." There were rumors that this call was alluding to illegal substances. Another person of interest was named Scott Grant, who, if you remember, is the soldier that is rumored to have been with Dylan when he dropped off Patrick at the apartment. Both before and after Patrick's remains were found, Scott refused to give a sworn written statement. In June of 2008, Scott returned from the Middle East, where he then promptly hired a lawyer to invoke his right to remain silent. Not long after his return, he was discharged from the army while also divorcing his wife. Scott's now ex-wife, Kristen, avoided speaking with investigators about the matters revolving around Patrick, as she thought it was a mess that she didn't need to get involved in, as she was going to be leaving Scott soon anyway. But not long after separating, Kristen stated that Scott may have had a hand in Patrick's death. She informed police that on March 16th, the day that Patrick went missing, Scott had told her to say that he was with her all night if anyone were to ask where he was. Then about a month later, Kristen claimed that Scott said he sold cocaine to Patrick. At this point, Patrick was still missing. Then Dylan Rustmeyer was discharged from the army as well, and he told authorities that Scott had sold Patrick illegal substances. He didn't provide this information at the start of the investigation because he didn't want the negative light that the investigation brought to hinder his opportunities at work. Then in May of 2007, Scott began dating a woman named Becky Ferguson, who was a girlfriend of his in the past. Becky stated that Scott told her a story about how he and a few other soldiers committed a crime that would send everyone to prison for a very long time. In total, there were 4 men, including Scott. He said that at some point, one of the men began to feel guilty for the crime, which worried the rest of the group. Scott had the idea that they would lure the member that was beginning to feel guilty into the woods and beat him to death. Becky didn't take Scott seriously at first, but once she heard of the news that Patrick Rust was found on a farm in September, she started to think that maybe Scott was telling the truth. Scott was arrested in March of 2013 in Augusta, Maine for a domestic violence assault. and he was then sentenced to 3 years in prison in January of 2015. But he was released in November of 2017, and to this day, police have never questioned Scott in regards to Patrick's death. And there are surprisingly a ton of additional details in this case, but I don't think I've ever seen this event covered at all online. So for the sake of the video, I will cut this entry off here, but let me know what you guys think in the comments. In 1872, the Mary Celeste was found adrift in the Atlantic Ocean with no one aboard the ship. It was discovered by Captain David Morehouse. He noticed that the ship seemed to be unguided and stopped to offer help. He sent a boarding party over to the other ship, but upon searching, the group couldn't find a single person on board. The crewmen's quarters seemed to be normal with everyone's possessions in place, but they noticed that the lifeboat was missing and the bottom of the ship was flooded with over 3.5 feet of water. There was also about 1,700 barrels of alcohol left behind, as well as a 6-month supply of food and water. The Mary Celeste began its journey on November 7th, 1872 with 7 crewmen. On board were also Captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs, his wife Sarah, and their 2-year-old daughter Sophia. The ship's final log entry was made on November 25th at 5 a.m. where it spoke about harsh storms. Then another 10 days passed, and that's when the ship was discovered by the De Gratia. The British ship sailed with the Mary Celeste for over 800 miles to Gibraltar, where the ship was assessed in a salvage hearing in an attempt to earn some cash from the ship's insurers. But the Attorney General in charge found the entire situation to be very suspicious and thought that this was part of some sort of scam. The investigation took over 3 months long, but the court officially determined that there was no evidence of foul play, and the salvagers received a payment of $46,000, or at least they were supposed to. You see, the salvagers only got about a sixth of that amount, since the court was still iffy on whether or not the De Gratia crew was trying to pull a fast one or not. But we still have no clue as to what had happened to the crew on board the Mary Celeste. Despite the court's ruling, the idea of foul play lingered. One theory suggested that Captain Briggs and Captain Morehouse conspired to share the money obtained from the salvage payment, but there was no indication of any sort of friendship between the two men. Plus, if Briggs intended on disappearing after obtaining the money, why did he leave behind his son, Arthur? A different theory proposed that the crew abandoned the ship believing that it was going to sink or even explode, which may explain the missing lifeboat. A rope fastened between the boat and the ship was found to be cut and not untied, which may indicate a sense of urgency within the crew. Within the logs, there were details of small explosions coming from the hold, as well as ominous rumbling noises. One investigator suggested that a sailor went down to where the noise was coming from to investigate, which just so happened to be where the alcohol was stored. The sailor may have been holding an open flame or a cigar, which could have caused an explosion when interacting with the fumes. The true fate regarding the crew of the Mary Celeste continues to intrigue people to this day, but no one knows for sure just where the crew went and why they abandoned the ship. On November 24, 1997 at 6 a.m., a mother named Marlene Eisenberg made her way to the kitchen. On her way out of the bedroom, she noticed that the door to the garage was left open. Marlene simply went over to close it before getting her 5-month-old daughter, and that's when she realized that her baby was missing. The Icebergs had unknowingly left their garage door open overnight, and someone had entered their home and abducted 5-month-old Sabrina Iceberg. Investigators were able to find a shoe print and blonde hair that may have belonged to the culprit. Initially, authorities suspected that the parents had done the unthinkable to their daughter and had just made this situation up as a cover, but both of them denied this. One reason that made people suspicious was the smiling from the parents at a public appeal centered around Sabrina's disappearance. Both Marlene and her husband were asked to take polygraph tests, and Marlene's results were never released to the public. The sheriff said that the results were not inconclusive, however, due to Marlene's hysterical state, they would not publicly announce whether she had passed or failed the test. At this point, the couple were still the primary suspects, so they resorted to hiring a lawyer. According to the police, the Icebergs were far from cooperative when it came to answering questions regarding the event. And to go along with the strange smiling from Steve and Marlene, there was a video of Sabrina the day before she disappeared where her face was bruised and a patch of her hair was missing. In November of 1999, both Steve and Marlene were arrested and charged with conspiracy, lying to police, and providing false information regarding their daughter's disappearance. Authorities also claimed that they had a recorded conversation of Marlene saying, "The baby's dead and buried. It was found dead because you did it. The baby's dead no matter what you say, you just did it." And then Steve said, "I wish I hadn't harmed her. They don't know the truth, right?" But despite the apparent progress in the case, a judge dropped all of the charges towards Steve and Marlene. The judge stated that the recording was too garbled to be comprehended and therefore cannot be used as evidence against the couple. In April of 2003, police decided to revisit some previous leads on the case, one of which was from 1998, where an unidentified girl only known as Paloma Unknown was found abandoned in Mexico. She went on to be taken in by a family in the US and was raised in Chicago. Police suspected that this girl was actually Sabrina. However, the police were able to find this girl eventually and tested her DNA against Sabrina's, and it was found that the two were not the same. Paloma's identity was never revealed. Then in 2017, a woman got in touch with the Eisenbergs through Facebook saying that she thinks she may be Sabrina. The woman said she had no documents or photos to show the first 5 months of her life, and she bore a resemblance to the other Eisenberg children. And as far as I know, the results of DNA testing were either never revealed or they just have not been completed yet. Official records within the Vatican share that the over 260 Catholic popes in history have all been men, but there is one tale that suggests that there was a single female pope at one point in time during the 9th century. This woman is known as Pope Joan. Supposedly, she disguised herself as a man before entering religious training, where she became an accomplished scholar. Through her hard work, she was elected as Pope in the year 855 and ruled for over 2 years. It wasn't until 858 where she abruptly went into labor during a procession. And from here, the details get a bit hazy. Some say that she died while giving birth to her child, while others claim that her followers tied her to a horse and stoned her to death after finding out that the Pope was a woman. Most historians seem to believe that Pope Joan is no more than a legend, as there are no reliable historical texts mentioning her. And 2 of the articles that I was reading when researching this entry mentioned in a quote-unquote abundance of clues supporting the idea that Pope Joan was real, but they failed to mention any sort of clues. In Arlington, Virginia in 2016, over the course of several months, an unidentified individual was defecating at the Fort Bernard Park. One woman named Megan Collins said, "It was inside the little stall over there," as she gestured towards some playground equipment. Authorities notified the public that whoever was defecating in the area was hiding the poop under something like a shirt or leaves, and any curious children who went to pick up said shirt would get a handful of feces. Another parent said, "To defecate outside is one thing, but then in a kid's park where kids can easily fall into it, that really shocks me." Authorities have had little success in figuring out just who is responsible for this disgusting act. They suspect that the person is going to the park after midnight when nobody is around. Police are still looking for whoever the man or woman is, and once caught, they will be charged with a misdemeanor. So that's going to end off layer 3, and this will be the first entry of layer 4 and the final one for this video. The 2003 ricin letters refers to 2 letters, one of which was mailed to the White House. And as you can probably tell by the name, the letter was laced with ricin, which, in case you do not know, is a very toxic plant protein that can be fatal even in small amounts. The CDC states that 500 micrograms is the minimum lethal dose of ricin in humans if it is inhaled or injected, and has been used many times in history as an assassination weapon. The second letter was found in South Carolina, however it did not have an address. The letters were sent in October and November and were signed by an individual who called themselves Fallen Angel. The first letter was discovered on October 15th, 2003 2003 at a mail sorting center in Greenville, South Carolina, and the letter was actually part of a larger package which also contained a small metal vial that housed the ricin. And on the outside of the envelope there was actually a label that said, "Caution, ricin poison enclosed in a sealed container. Do not open without proper protection." As for the actual letter, it was typed up using a typewriter and said, "To the Department of Transportation, I am a fleet owner of a tanker company. I have easy access to castor pulp. If my demand is dismissed, I am capable of making ricin. My demand is simple. January 4th, 2004 starts the new hours of service for trucks, which include a ridiculous 10 hours in the sleeper berth. Keep at 8 or I will start dumping. You have been warned. This is the only letter that will be sent by me, Fallen Angel." As I've previously mentioned, this particular letter had no delivery address posted on it. The second letter was received on November 6th, 2003 and was addressed to the White House. The White House Mail Processing Facility encountered a small vial of white powder which tested negative for ricin initially, but later tests came back positive for ricin contamination. And despite being addressed to the White House, this letter yet again was meant to be written for the US Department of Transportation. It read, "Department of Transportation, if you change the hours of service on January 4th, 2004, I will turn DC into a ghost town. The powder on the letter is ricin. Have a nice day, Fallen Angel." The Secret Service took until November 12th to alert other agencies that the ricin tests came back positive, but fortunately nobody died. There was a third letter that was discovered on February 2nd, 2004 in the mailroom in the Dirksen Senate office building, but it isn't 100% confirmed whether or not this third letter was sent by the exact same person. And that is all for part 17. The next installment of this series is going to be diving into layer 4 and the mysteries will just get more obscure. If you made it all the way to the end, drop an envelope emoji in the comments and I'll try and leave you a heart. Thank you so much for making it to the end, and a very special thank you to all of my patrons and channel members for supporting me. Thank you to Greg, 4L60E, Adventure Ted, Coalescent Carnage, Chaz It Up, Cody Grandman, Courtney Von Schriltz, Emma, Flannery Rose, John Thomas, Maui, Owl Yoop, Saucy Sofa, Schmapton Schmerica, Steve Sharofsky, Aiden, Bad Baphomet, Beck Walls, Bennett Malillo, Bestial Darkness, Cam Haha, Chris, Commit Felony Feline, Coy Jones, Coyote Lord, Derek Waterbury, David Veltman, Dim Resin, Dip Shizzle, Edwill, Eileed McRudgery, Evil Dead Bread, Foley, Gary, Gino Johnstone, Giselle Sweet Moncour, Glitter Fleshgum, Grace, HaloFan234, Harley, Harley Deadman, Hide Worry, Jackson W, Jacob Adams, Jacoby Gilbert, J Record 22, Jay Huds, Joseph Mulligan, Joseph Virgin, Josh Falls, Kent, Kiana, King Mog, Lady Fang, Len, Liss Electro, Main Adam, Marco Espinoza, McLover, Me4, Michael Myers, Morgan Smith, Nathan Brown, Nathan Flagg, Nina Brown, Okami Fan 1 Productions, Pedro Elizondo Jr., Ray Booney, Ray, Roanch, Roto, Sally Bunce, Samili Moody, Sarah Kruder, Sarah Richardson, Shane Whitehead, Skylar Morris, Sophie Livingstone, Stuxinator, Subtle Spell, Taylor, Taylor Stone King, The Puff Lord, The Hidden Eye, Teresa Headlam, Tony Swanevelt, Typical Ethan, Victor Chamil, Wilder Than Mild, -5 stars, Sasha Wise, Jerome Reuter, Synth Runner, Astrid Yessing, Blasphemous Baphomet, Neve, Mam Shiba 101, Alan Amaro, Randvar, Aphotic Cthulhu, Emma Chacho, and Barely Living Dead Girl. Thank you all so much for your support every month. If any of you are still watching and are interested in supporting the channel, check out the description. There are links to the Patreon and the memberships. If you do become either one, you get early access, but if you become a patron, you get exclusive videos that are not available on YouTube. And I am currently in the process of making a pretty big video should be up at the very end of the month, but there may or may not be a couple fewer uploads this month because of that, because it's like 6 hours, 5 hours, something crazy. So anyways, that's going to be it for today. Thank you all so much for sticking through to the end, and I'll talk to you guys all again next time.